Okay, so of course, most commonly, no, scope, of course, is you were going to list all the necessary modules, no, that required to your proposal. So most commonly, when we say scope, it will cover, of course, the most commonly, no, as I mentioned earlier, it's just about, let's say, for example, in your proposal, if that is SIS, no, Student Information System, it is much more focused on the what are the available module. Let's say, for example, your proposals covered in creating a login logout, security, audit trail, and other modules, no, which covered with your proposal. Again, scope defines the boundaries or what the programmer must provide to meet the requirements of the system. So limitation are also tied into scope. As a programmer, you are not going to create a new robot to check in inventory as it receive or autonomously do a nightly inventory. So again, later on, I will give you some additional inputs regarding scope and limitation. So this time, I'll just want to give the floor to our presenter. Go ahead.
So good afternoon po ulit. So my topic is scope and delimitation or limitation. So here's my topic outline. What is the scope and delimitation in research? Difference between delimitations and limitations. Guidelines on how to write a scope. Guidelines on how to write delimitations, and lastly, examples of delimitation and limitation in research. So first, what is the scope and delimitation in research? The scope and delimitation of a thesis dissertation or research paper define the topic and boundaries of the research problem to be investigated. The scope details how in-depth your study is to explore the research question and the parameters in which it will operate in relation to the population and time frame. So while the delimitations of the study are the factors and variables that not included in the investigation. In other words, they are the boundaries the researcher sets in terms of the study duration. For example, the population size and type of participants. Difference between delimitations and limitations. So delimitations is referred to the boundaries of the research study, while limitations is related to the validity and reliability of the study. In other words, limitations are what the researcher cannot do, and the limitations are what the researcher will not do. Both are important because they help to put the research findings into context, and although they explain how the study is limited, they increase the credibility and validity of a research project. And here's the guidelines on how to write the scope. First, why? Why the general aims and objectives or purpose of the research? Second, what? What the subject to be investigated and the included variables. Third, where? Where the location or setting of the study, where the data will be gathered and to which entity the data will be belong. Third, fourth, when? When the time frame within which the data is to be collected. Fifth, who? who the subject matter of the study, and the population from which they will be selected. This population needs to be large enough to be able to make generalization. And lastly, how? How the research is to be conducted, including a description of the research style. Example, whether it is experimental research, qualitative research, or a case study. So here's the 3 prompts on how to write in your scope. First is, this study is to focus on. Second, this study covers the. And the third one, this study aims to. And here's the guidelines on how to write the limitations. First, readers need to know why they were set. Second, what alternative options were available. And the third one, why these alternatives were rejected. Since the delimitation parameters are within the researcher's control, readers need to know why they were set. And here's also the 3 prompts on how to write your study delimitations. First is, this study does not cover, this study is limited to, and lastly, the following has been excluded from this study. And here's the examples of the limitations in research. First, research objectives, research questions, research variables, and target populations. And also the example of limitations in research. First is issues with sample and selection, insufficient sample size, population traits or specific participants, or statistical significance, limited financial resources or funding constraints, lack of previous research studies on the topic which has allowed for further analysis. And that's all. Thank you.
Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, no, most commonly the scope limitations will be the covered, no, of your proposal, no. So most commonly you will be able to, as what our presenter mentioned, no, what, why, where, how, and so on and so forth. Then when it comes to delimitation, this will be an example of let's say, for example, your proposal is just only web design, no, web development. Your proposal is just only through web or through mobile application pero Android lang siya. So maybe somebody are asking about the cross-platform. When we say cross-platform, pwede sa Android, pwede sa iOS. So yun yung mga delimitation. Instead na cross-platform, pinili mo lang Android yung ginawa mong games. Okay? Pag sinabi nating limitations, let's say, let's say nag-develop ka ngayon ng system. Kung mobile, ang ginamit mo SQLite 2.0. Then after a year, nagkaroon na ng database na SQLite 5 or 10. So hindi na ngayon siya fit. May mga design na hindi na fit, may mga anong tawag sa ganito, may mga part na doon sa database na hindi na nagfi-fit sa ating ginawa. So yun yung mga limitation, uncontrollable. Okay? Pag sinabi natin delimitation, pwede sana pero hindi natin nilagay. Pag sinabing limitation, pwedeng mangyari sana, pwedeng na-anticipate na natin, kaya lang uncontrollable na pwedeng mangyari. Okay? Halimbawa, may nababasa ako mga system na it is best if you will be able to use Google Chrome. May mga ganon. No? Instead na pwede naman sa lahat ng web browser pero pinili niya lang. So yun yung limitations. Again, scope, ano yung covered. Pag sinabi natin delimitation, ano yung hindi mo isasama muna for the meantime. Pag sinabing limitation, yun yung mga uncontrollable. Okay? So I think that's it.